Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Science for the Board. We're now on a monthly schedule, the first Wednesday of every month. Next month will be Laura Ellen Wood Defoe talking about Saturn, Titan, and the spacecraft she dropped off on the Titan, which is still there. But tonight we're going back in time, way back in time. We're going to the Neanderthals, which is an interesting subject for me because I have a lot of Neanderthal DNA in me. Our speaker is Corinne Foster. She holds the record in Science for the Board for the most views on our YouTube site, 2,373 as of today. That's an amazing hurdle for you to try to beat, Corinne, today. So Corinne earned her BA at the University of Southern California and then spent most of her career as a health insurance underwriter. She has also lived in about 8 states. She's lived in Denmark, and she recently got back from the Peace Corps in Lesotho, Africa, where she helped to decrease incidence of HIV, with the country with the second highest incident of HIV. And she's kept up with anthropology throughout the decades. So with that, everybody, please mute your mics, and it's all yours, Corinne.
Hello, good evening, everyone. I appreciate you tuning into my talk this evening. In a previous talk, I spoke about the hominid species, Neanderthals, and the Denisovans, our closest ancient relatives, and how we, Homo sapiens, lived side by side, interbred with both species, and how they impacted our genes. In my next 2 talks, I will concentrate on the Neanderthal, some of our misconceptions about our closest ancient ancestors, as well as their physical and cultural contributions to us, Homo sapiens. I am excited to talk to you tonight about the Neanderthal and to include both divisions of anthropology, the cultural and the physical, and their interdependence on each other to give a complete picture of the human species, the Neanderthal. I would like to talk about some of the misconceptions that we still hold on today about our ancestors, the Neanderthals. Today's talk will cover the following topics. Who are the Neanderthal? What did they look like? Where did they live? Neanderthals' intelligence and behavior. What did they eat? How did they live? What were their daily lives like? Neanderthal and COVID resistance and susceptibility, and part 1 of sex and the Neanderthal. I will be giving another talk at a later date. That talk will cover, did the Neanderthal make art? Could Neanderthal speak? Death celebrated in the Neanderthal culture, and part 2, because it's everyone's favorite, sex and the Neanderthal. We are going to learn about some of the misconceptions that we still hold on today about the Neanderthal. A popular impression of the Neanderthal is one of the brute. A common insult in my case might include me saying something about my ex-husband, John Miller, such as, my ex-husband is a Neanderthal. I will hope to show that far from being a brute, the Neanderthal had what we call culture. They had art, they ate a variety of foods, not just meat. They made tools, they had language, a belief in the afterlife, and they must have been good in bed, as we Homo sapiens had sex with them. So who were the Neanderthals? They were our closest genetic relatives. So why is the study of the Neanderthals even important? Because it turns out, in understanding the Neanderthal, we understand ourselves. Neanderthal DNA does influence clinical traits in modern humans. Scientists have discovered associations between Neanderthal DNA and a wide range of traits, including immunological, dermatological, neurological, psychiatric, and reproductive, that relate currently to we, Homo sapien. Neanderthals were evolutionary cousins, sharing about 99.8% of our genetic code, including genes important for brain expansion and language. They were similar enough in terms of biology and behavior that Homo sapiens and Neanderthals interbred between 40,000 years and 100,000 years ago. We know more facts about Neanderthal than any other extinct humans. Many thousands of their artifacts and fossils have been found, including several nearly complete skeletons. Neanderthals were human like us, but they were a distinct species called Homo neanderthalensis. Together with the Asian people known as Denisovans, Neanderthals are our closest ancient human relatives. So let's talk about the discovery of the Neanderthal species. Neanderthal 1 was the first specimen to be recognized as an early human fossil. When it was discovered in 1856 in Germany, scientists had never seen a specimen like it. The oval-shaped skull with a low receding forehead and a distinct brow ridges with thick, strong bones. In 1964, it became the first fossil hominid species to be named. Geologist William King suggested the name Homo neanderthalis after these fossils found in the Feldhofer cave in the Neander Valley in Germany. Tal means valley in German. Several years after Neanderthal 1 was discovered, scientists realized that prior fossil discoveries, looking as far back as 1829 in Belgium and 1848 in Gibraltar, were also Neanderthal. Even though they weren't recognized at that time, these two earlier discoveries were actually the first early human fossils ever found. Sometime between 520,000 years ago and 630,000 years ago, the shared ancestors of Neanderthal and Homo sapiens diverged and embarked on separate evolutionary paths. Members of that population that spread to Europe eventually evolved into Neanderthals, whereas those in Africa gave rise to Homo sapiens, or modern humans. During this period of separation, the groups evolved distinct anatomies. Modern humans were relatively long, tall, and lean. Neanderthals became short and massive, with the average male being 5 feet 4 inches at 170 pounds, and females were 5 feet 1 inch at 145 pounds, based on estimates from femur and pelvis size. With the common ancestry, the lineages also increased in brain size, but in different ways. To accommodate their brains, Neanderthals' crania expanded lengthwise, like footballs, where modern human skulls became more globular, like soccer balls. 150,000 years ago, both species had brains surpassing 1,400 cc's, about 3 times larger than chimpanzees, our closest living relatives. Now we'll talk about Neanderthal intelligence and behavior. As you may have been gathering, despite their reputation as being primitive cavemen, Neanderthals were actually very intelligent and accomplished humans. They were no ape men. So it's unfair to them that the word Neanderthal is used as an insult today. The Neanderthal brain size. Neanderthals had bigger brains than people today. In any textbook on human evolution, you will find that fact. It is accompanied by measurements of endocranial volume, the space inside a skull. On average, this value for Neanderthal is about 6 cups. And for recent humans, it's about 5.7 cups. So does that quarter cup of brain matter? Were Neanderthals smarter than our kind? While brain size is important, cognitive abilities are influenced by numerous factors, including body size, neuron density, and how particular brain regions are enlarged and connected. Some of these variables are unknowable for Neanderthals, as we only have their cranial bones and we don't have their brains. But anthropologists have made the most of the use of the hollow skulls to learn what they can about the Neanderthal mind. So some of the examples of our genetic inheritance with the Neanderthal are Neanderthal DNA affects cells called keratinocytes that help protect the skin from environmental damage, such as ultraviolet radiation and pathogens, reducing risk of developing sun-induced skin lesions called keratosis. Neanderthal genes influenced the increased risk for nicotine addiction, depression, both positively and negatively, and blood coagulation. What did Neanderthal look like? What do you imagine a Neanderthal would look like? Well, we don't actually have to go far to see genes that we Homo sapiens inherited from our Neanderthal ancestors. You can see some of them in the picture of my ex-husband. Okay, he most likely has some Neanderthal genes. For example, John has inherited the following Neanderthal genes: blue eyes, straight light hair, a predominant brow ridge, and a relatively large nose. But as for a more detailed description of what a Neanderthal looked like, Neanderthals had a long, low skull compared to the more globular skull of modern humans, with a characteristic prominent brow ridge above their eyes. Their face was also distinctive. The central part of their face protruded forward and was dominated by a very big, wide nose. Some scientists think this feature may have been an adaptation to living in colder, drier environments. The large internal volume of the nose would have acted to moisten and warm the air they breathed. Their front teeth were large, and scratch marks show they were regularly used like a third hand when preparing food and other materials. I don't know about you, but sometimes I too use my front teeth as a third hand. Unlike modern humans, Neanderthal didn't have much of a chin. The modern human has a more rounded skull and lacks the prominent brow ridge. Neanderthals had strong muscular bodies and wide hips and shoulders. Neanderthals had stocky physiques with short lower legs and lower arms. Their short, stocky physiques were suited to cold environments. The bulky trunk, in addition to the shorter lower leg and lower arm bones, gave Neanderthals proportions that would have minimized the skin's surface area, presumably to conserve heat under the predominantly colder conditions of the last 200,000 years. Some researchers argue that the physique also gave the Neanderthals greater power in their arms and legs for close-range ambushes during hunting. But the importance of the Neanderthal does not stop at their biology. Later, I will talk about their contributions to technology, such as the use of fire and the use of art to depict their environment, as well as tool making. When did the Neanderthal live? The Neanderthals have a long evolutionary history. The earliest known examples of Neanderthal-like fossils are around 430,000 years ago. The best known Neanderthals lived between about 130 and 40,000 years ago, after which all physical evidence of them vanishes. For the most part, Neanderthals were a resilient group. They existed for about 200,000 years longer than we modern humans have been alive. Given our current trajectory of climate change and planet destruction, we Homo sapiens may have a much shorter history than that of the Neanderthal. Where did the Neanderthal live? Neanderthals evolved in Europe and Asia, while modern humans, our species, Homo sapiens, were evolving in Africa. Judging from fossil evidence found in northern Spain and England, the Neanderthal lineage was already well established in Europe by 400,000 years ago. Neanderthals inhabited a vast area, roughly from present-day England, east to Uzbekistan, and south nearly to the Red Sea. There are time-spanned periods in which glaciers advanced and retreated again and again, but the Neanderthals adjusted. When the glaciers moved in and edible plants became scarcer, they relied more heavily on large hoofed animals for food, hunting the reindeer and wild horses that grazed the steppes and tundra. Paleontologists have no idea how many Neanderthals existed. Crude estimates are in the many thousands, but archaeologists have found more fossils from Neanderthal than any extinct human species. What did Neanderthal eat, you may ask? How did the Neanderthal survive? Compared to early humans living in tropical Africa, where more abundant edible plants were available year-round, the number of plant foods Neanderthals would have dropped significantly during the winter or colder climates in Eurasia, forcing Neanderthals to exploit other food options like meat more heavily. There is evidence that Neanderthals were specialized season hunters, eating animals that were abundant at different seasons, such as reindeer in the winter and red deer in the summer. Scientists have clear evidence of Neanderthals hunting from uncovering sharp wooden spears and large numbers of big game animal remains that were hunted by the Neanderthal. It appears that Neanderthals who hunted deer with flint-tipped spears and used fire to produce birch tar. There's evidence from Gibraltar that when they lived in coastal areas, they exploited marine resources such as mollusks, seals, dolphins, and fish. It appears that Neanderthals collected seashells by the seashore, though there is no evidence that any of them were named Sally. They also may have swam underwater to retrieve live clams to later shape into sharp tools and scrapers. Isotopic chemical analysis of Neanderthal bones also tells scientists the average Neanderthal diet consisted of a lot of meat. But scientists have also found plaque on the remains of molar teeth containing starch grains, concrete evidence that Neanderthals ate plants. So, in order to survive, Neanderthals used all resources, fauna, flora, and minerals. They were picking, harvesting, fishing, hunting, and they sometimes scavenged carrion. The effectiveness of Neanderthal subsistence behavior patterns implies a good understanding of the raw materials available and a good toolkit to use them. It appears that Neanderthals were masters at making and controlling fires. Research have found distinctive hydrocarbons from ancient hearths in a cave inhabited up to 60,000 years ago. This study gives weight to the theory that Neanderthals were skilled at making fires rather than just exploiting natural wildfire. They needed fire to live in the very challenging environments. Although Neanderthals were able to use fire, whether they regularly cooked their food is unclear. How did Neanderthal live? Contrary to common belief, Neanderthals did not live deep inside caves, but at their entrance under rock shelters. They possessed the necessary know-how to build temporary shelters, which are used during their seasonal travel to follow game, to harvest plants and vegetables, or to stock up with flint. La Folie, a site located in the northwestern part of France, provides exceptional evidence of a base camp in a circular wind shelter. Examples of outdoor construction are rare since the materials, wood, plants, skins, etc., used to build huts, tents, or cabins did not last long. The La Folie campsite was reconstructed using different areas of activities: a carving station, a leather working area, a living space, and a bedding area. There were displays of lit objects as well as attachment systems used for fixing the wooden pole palisade to the ground. The La Folie site has enabled the reconstruction of habitat that was protected by the windbreak and where Neanderthals carried out their daily activities, like flint snapping, meal preparation, the processing of animal and plant resources, approximately 60,000 BC. Neanderthals were skillful stone craftsmen. They used scrapers, bifaces or hand axes, lift flakes, stone spearheads, and blades. I would like to talk about bone lasers, as they are thought to be the first tool that requires a technological leap to exploit the special properties of bone. The slender curved implements called lasers were shaped from deer ribs and likely used to work animal hides to make them softer, tougher, and more waterproof. The tip of each tool was tapered, ground, and rounded off. On one side was polished to a shine. The other side was fresh, unmottled bone. Intact, each tool would have been 20 to 40 centimeters long. Neanderthals also used pressure tools. All these can be found at Neanderthal sites. The majority are old tools that have been thrown away. A showcase here displays 11 tools originating from the Lefroy site, which makes up the perfect Neanderthal pouch. In it, they carried almost all they needed in their daily lives: a reserve of raw materials, several fresh, sharp lift flakes, 2 or 3 scrapers to cut up meat or carve wood, lasers for leatherworking, and pressure tools for sharpening. These tools indicate that Neanderthals command of hand rock, knapping, or chipping, using striking techniques and their ability to craft tools suited to their various activities. Thus, these tools are hardly the approach of an unsophisticated savage. Neanderthals were indeed badass hunters. In all climates and latitudes, Neanderthals hunted bison, horses, reindeer, ibexes, camas, and in regions further east, mammoths and saga antelopes. They also hunted carnivores such as fox, wolves, and bears for fur, as well as small game animals like hares and birds. While there are many traces of hunting and the use of carcasses, it is likely that Neanderthals also scavenged the carrion of animals that were difficult to kill, like mammoths and rhinoceroses. And they ate marine animals washed up along shore, such as seals and dolphins. Hunting requires weapons, wooden spears, bolas, knives, stones, tipped spears. With these rudimentary arms, strategies were needed to get closer to game in order to identify their habits and anatomy and the most convenient places to capture them. An analysis of the traces remaining on Neanderthal tools bears witness to the operational chain involved in the processing of game. Not only were the meat, fat, and skin bones retrieved, but the ligament and nerves were used as rope. Like the rest of the species, the Neanderthals were far from what we once pictured, a brutish, stocky group of primitive humans who could only grunt to communicate and violently wield their clubs before anyone who got too close. The Neanderthal used many different tools, ate a variety of foods, again reveals how similar they were to us. Like us, they were able to successfully adapt and exploit their environment. Now I'd like to talk about Neanderthal and COVID vulnerability and resistance. Genetic inherited immunity is tricky. It appears that the Neanderthal contributed both a vulnerability to COVID and a resistance, depending on which gene you may have inherited. I will look at Neanderthal's contribution to COVID vulnerability and resistance. Obviously, the study of COVID, specifically SARS-CoV-2, is relatively new, and new discoveries are happening all the time. A study from the Genetic Mortality in Critical Care Consortium looked at a stretch of DNA on chromosome 12, where a haplotype, which is a cluster of genetic variants that are inherited together that affects susceptibility to the coronavirus, is located. For each copy of the Neanderthal haplotype a person inherited, the risk of needing intensive care fell approximately 22%, according to the report on March 2nd from the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science. The variants may affect the ability or function of genes involved in a biochemical chain reaction that ends with the destruction of viral RNA, including the coronaviruses. The protective variants are largely absent among people in sub-Saharan Africa, where few people carry genes inherited from Neanderthal. About 25 to 30% of the present-day people of Asia and European ancestor carry the protective variants. Some Black people in Americas also inherited the protective haplotype, presumably from Asian or European or Native American ancestors. But on the other side of the genetic inheritance is a susceptibility. Recently, it was shown that a haplotype in the region chromosome 3 is associated with becoming critically ill upon infection with SARS-CoV-2 and was contributed to modern humans by Neanderthal. Each copy of the haplotype approximately doubles the risk of its carriers requiring intensive care with the infection of SARS-CoV-2. It reaches carrier frequencies of up to 65% in South Asian and 16% in European, whereas almost absent in East Asia. Thus, although this haplotype is detrimental for its carriers during the current pandemic, it may have been beneficial in earlier times in South Asia, perhaps by conferring protection against other pathogens, whereas it may have been eliminated in East Asia by negative selection. Now I'd like to talk about Neanderthals, signs in their sex lives. I'd like to talk about Neanderthals and monogamy. A common misconception about the Neanderthal is that they took any female around, preferably by her hair, and had sex with her. Well, men's anatomy may prove this perception wrong. Now, let me define monogamy. It doesn't mean like birds that we mate for life. Monogamy means having a sexual relationship with one partner at a time. So let's talk about sexual organs. Though it may seem crass to wonder what a Neanderthal penis and vaginas were like, the genitals of different organisms have been the subject of a vast body of scientific research. In looking at Google searches, if you search for penis evolution on Google Scholar, it will return about 98,000 results, while vagina evolution yields about 87,000 results. It turns out an animal's sexual organs can reveal a surprising amount about their lifestyle, mating strategy, and evolutionary history. So asking questions about their equipment is just another route to understanding them. The animal kingdom contains a kaleidoscope array of imaginative designs. These include the Argonaut octopus and its worm-like detachable penis, which can swim off alone to mate with females, a practical feature thought to have evolved because the males are only about 10% of the size of their lovers. And how about the triple vaginas of kangaroos, which make it possible for females to be perpetually pregnant? One way in which humans' penises are unusual is that they are smooth. Our closest living relatives, bonobos and chimpanzees, with whom we share 99% of our DNA, have penile spines. These tiny barbs, which are made from the same substance as skin and hair, keratin, are thought to have evolved to clear out the sperm of competing males, or to lightly chafe the female's vagina and put her off from having sex, at least for a while. Back in 2013, scientists discovered that the genetic code for penile spines is lacking from Neanderthal genomes, just as it is from modern humans, suggesting that it vanished from our collective ancestors at least 800,000 years ago. This is significant because penile spines are thought to be most useful in promiscuous species, where they may help males to compete with others and maximize the chances of reproducing. This has led to speculation that, like us, Neanderthals were mostly monogamous. So, regardless of how you feel about monogamy, you have a Neanderthal's smooth dick to either thank or to blame. In conclusion of this talk today, I hope you can see that the study of the Neanderthal species is important in understanding ourselves, and that they were not the brutish beasts that are portrayed, but were much like us. Neanderthals were much more evolved than what we used to think. We are now at a turning point where we should consider that Neanderthals and contemporary modern humans were equal in many domains. In my next lecture, I'd like to talk about Neanderthal art, language, culture, such as celebration of death, and of course, more about their sex lives. I would like to thank Bruce Ellison for allowing me to be part of this group and allowing me to give this talk to other bored people interested in science. And I would also like to thank John Miller, my ex-husband, for being such a good egg and allowing me to use him as an example in this talk. Now, I would like to see if I can answer any questions you might have about my talk today and the Neanderthal.
Questions? Does anybody have questions?
I have a question. This is Dan. Hi.
Hi, Dan.
I'm a big fan of Neanderthal.
Oh, cool. Yay.
I just read an entire book on standing up, on bipedalism, and one of the things is besides all that, Neanderthals mated or crossbred with humans, and yet we call them a different species.
Right.
And the definition of a species is that they cannot crossbreed with other similar species.
There's different definitions of species. Yeah, and that's yeah.
My definition is from my schooling, my undergraduate back in 1975. So
I think Wikipedia has updated all of our definitions.
So how do they define species then if they can interbreed? I mean, if how different are they if they can interbreed? So I think in some ways this might be a type of you realize that the idea that species of human-like animals were lost or destroyed by nature or quote unquote God which was kind of offensive to a lot of religious people. But the idea that Neanderthals are a different species might make it more palatable to people who don't want to think that God actually killed a bunch of humans off and that they could possibly do the same thing with Homo sapiens. So, I got to wonder if we called them a different species just because it was more convenient to the idea that, nature could put an end to something like us, where, that was just incomprehensible. The idea that there are other species like humans was unpalatable back in the 1800s.
Right.
Darwin and all these other guys, they didn't want to even acknowledge that there were similar species that were basically put to death by nature. So, I wonder if the idea of speciation and calling them a different species makes it more palatable. But in other words, it's interesting. This might be another thing for what we want to call understanding the intellectual context of speciations and things. But that was a nice talk. Thank you very much.
Yeah, if I could interject, I just read a paper about this. A lot of this is semantics. It's like, what's a planet? Is Pluto a planet or not? What's a galaxy? What isn't a galaxy in science? What's a species and what isn't? I mean, horses and donkeys have made mules for generations, for hundreds of years. And there are birds in Costa Rica that can have a viable offspring with different birds in the valley next to them, valley number 2. And those birds in valley number 2 can have offspring in the valley number 3 with a different species. But birds from valley number 1 can have viable offspring with birds in valley number 3. So a lot of that, I think, is really just semantic.
So viable offspring, but mules are sterile, right? Horses and donkeys, mules are sterile. So
yeah, I believe it was viable offspring in Costa Rica.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I know, by the way, I don't mind being called a Neanderthal with 2 exceptions. I don't believe in the afterlife, and I'm not short. I'm over 6 feet.
Go ahead, Jim.
All right, I have a question.
Thanks for sharing.
In one of the slides where you show the, I would say, I guess we can say people now. There was something up against this is the one showing where they were living right outside the cave. And there was something attached to the stone wall with what looked like some kind of spikes, you
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
and there was this thing hanging from the wall that looked like it was some sort
Where?
of
Oh, here.
fabric.
I
And
think
this other
it's
guy's holding something that looks like fabric.
supposed to be skin. I think it's supposed to be an animal skin.
Yeah, I do.
Well, if so, it was a pretty huge animal. Yeah, I'm just saying that in that rendition, it looks like fabric. The other thing was you
I
showed,
mean, they did hunt big animals. Like I said, they hunted mammoths, you know, so yeah, that could have been, you know, a mammoth skin, right?
and you showed another picture while you were talking about them, and in the background, there was an elephant walking by. But you didn't show them, yeah, that one. But you didn't show them growing up in Africa or Southern Asia.
But-
So where'd the elephant come?
Good point. Good point. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, because they know they were not in Africa. So yeah, I mean,
Perhaps it was a mammoth, and the mammoths were in North America, Siberia, and Europe.
right.
No, it doesn't look like a mammoth, but okay. Enjoyed the talk. Thank you.
Oh, I'm glad you enjoyed the talk. You know, it's sometimes hard to find pictures where you're trying to portray a certain idea and yeah. But that one I did find under, I mean, all my pictures I did find under, you know, references to Neanderthal, but yeah, I don't know. I don't know what that animal is.
I had two questions. One is, do we know what their lifespan was? How old did they live to be? And secondly, why did they die out if they were so wonderful?
On my first talk, I spoke a little talk in reference to why they died off. So my first talk, I did talk, you know, we don't know exactly why, but it does look like, you know, us Homo sapiens, you know, at least contributed to their decline. And you know, some of it, in my next talk, I'll talk about their language. And though they did have language, it was not as complex as you know, what we're able to talk. Their groups were pretty small. And it looks like Homo sapiens groups were large. You know, we were able to get larger groups. So, you know, kind of like what we did with the American Indians, right? You know, the Homo sapiens came over, you know, to Europe and, you know, just kind of decimated the population, you know, either, you know, from being able to communicate better, you know, with better tools, you know, that kind of thing. So it looks like, you know, I mean, there's always a possibility that, you know, genetically, again, because the Neanderthal lived in very small groups. They weren't, you know, allowed, they didn't have the genetic variations that, you know, the Homo sapiens did. So, you know, maybe the Homo sapiens brought, you know, some kind of disease, you know, like we brought to the American Indians that, you know, decimated them as well. I mean, there's just theories and conjecture, but that was my, you know, idea that, you know, there was some warring happening with, you know, more advanced language that the Homo sapiens had. Now, in terms of lifespan, it looks like my assistant here, it looks like they were about 20 to 40 years would be their lifespan. But, you know, I mean, you know, even when you go to, like, I've traveled in third world countries, you know, their lifespan's less because, you know, they don't have modern medicine. So, for example, you know, if they fell off, you know, a roof and broke their leg and got an infection, you know, they didn't have the kind of, you know, medicine that we have, you know, now.
I think it also corresponds to the lifetime of our teeth, our primary and secondary teeth. So by the time you're 40 years old, all your teeth fall out and then you can't eat anything and your nutrition goes to hell and then you die. So I kind of blame dentists for our longevity right now, you know, and all of our diseases of old age. That dentists don't like that idea, but I think it has some credence if you think
Oh,
about
so very much so. When I was an insurance underwriter and I underwrote long-term care insurance, right, we would definitely ask about older people's eating habits, their dental health, because you're right. You know, as you know, your dental health goes down, you're not able to eat, you know, as well, and yeah, it definitely affects your health. Yeah, no, you have a very good point. Yeah.
Yeah, if you think, you know, you've got to grind these rough grains, these cooked or uncooked grains between your molars, and you lose your molars, and all you got are a few front teeth. What do you got left? You know, you depend on other people to chew your food. I don't know how well that works.
Right. And if you ever visited, you know, like John and I have visited, you know, third world countries, and you know, the older people, they realize that they're burdened. You know, when they become too much of a burden on their society, they just kind of go off in the wilderness and go, because they realize that, you know, if the, you know, I mean, they do take care of one another, but at some point it's no longer viable. It's going to hurt the rest of the community if, you know, they're helping these old people out. So yeah.
Wow, really? No, I didn't know that. That's fascinating, but it probably does go back to.
Is there any reason to believe that the Neanderthals had a lifespan much different than Homo sapiens at that time? Like Utsi, the 5,300-year man they found in the Alps, he was only about in his 40s, 50s, and he was a very old man. I'm sure she heard me.
So
Yeah, well, Otzi was only 5,300 years ago. The Neanderthals died out at 40,000 years before.
Yeah,
So,
but they my point is they had a very hard life living out in the open more than we would be able to today. And so I'm not sure the two species were much different in that respect.
So my assistant here, she says there's a link in, I'm sorry, can you talk, Maureen?
There's a link in the meeting chat that has an interesting article regarding their lifespan, if anybody wants to learn more about that.
In one of the maps, it showed that they were living in the northern areas, Europe, whereas the Homo sapiens were mainly in Africa, in the Middle East. And if the Ice Age came down, it could have made life a little difficult for them if they stayed there. But if it happened, they would probably have moved. You know, they wouldn't just stay there and die. So
Right, I mean, they would have tried to, I mean, I think that that's another contributing factor, you know, and there's speculation to why they died off. Because, right, when they go down to compete, right, that there was an ice age, that, you know, it became difficult for them, and, you know, they're trying to move south. But when they do that, they start competing with Homo sapiens, who, you know, were, you know, in my view, you know, were, you know, had more weapons, were more violent, and so that they, you know, and were in bigger groups. So they destroyed, you know, the Neanderthal trying to move. But you're right. Yeah, definitely. I mean, like I said in my talk, you know, they had challenges with these, you know, ice ages, you know, and the ice coming down and then, you know, coming up. Yeah, I mean, life was much easier in Africa in terms of, you know, getting, you know, food.
All kinds of messages here. Dumb.
Well, I guess we're pretty much out of questions. So I think that wraps it up. Thanks a lot, Corinne. Let's see if you can beat your previous of 2,400 views on YouTube.
That's great.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
you.
Good night.